so as a member of the world community and being willing to act on behalf of these values, but doing so in a way that takes all the various equities into account. So just to put sort of the final point on it, we are looking at every option that's out there. In addition to the non-military actions that we've taken, I want to make sure that those full range of options are available to me. Some of them may end up being humanitarian. I mean, the biggest priority that we have right now is you've got tens of thousands of people who are gathered at the border, and we've got to make sure that they can get home. And that's why we're using some of our military aircrafts in addition to civilian aircrafts to help on that front. There may be situations in which Gaddafi is hunkered down in his compound, but the economy or food distribution systems in Tripoli, for example, start deteriorating. And we're going to have to figure out how do we potentially get food in there. So there are a whole range of options, military and non-military, that we're examining, and we'll be making these decisions based on what's best for the Libyan people and how can we make sure that we're minimizing the harm to innocent civilians during this process. Throughout all this, we will continue to send the clear message that it's time for Gaddafi to go. That is one of the options that we would be looking at.
President Obama speaking at the White House. Colonel Gaddafi should step down from power. He said history is moving against him. Let's get some analysis on that from Jane Dutton and Patty Culhane in Washington. Jane.
Thanks very much for that, Adrian. Let's go straight to Patty, who's listening in on this. Patty, I mean, unless I missed something, I couldn't hear anything new. He was reiterating that all options remain on the table.
Exactly. You know, this is a president who during the campaign said, I will find the middle ground. So it appears that he is definitely trying to find the middle ground between his very own Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. He is under a bit of pressure. The U.S. Senate passed a non-binding resolution urging the UN to impose a no-fly zone. But if the president is feeling that pressure, he's not showing it, simply saying that he wants to make sure all the options are on the table. A couple of things I thought were key. He said if he starts acting against defenseless civilians. Now, obviously, the pictures we've seen of the opposition, they are not defenseless by any means at this point. That may be something that the administration is looking at. I thought it was also interesting that he brought up what we've been bringing up here at the White House and so far hadn't gotten a response. What do you do not just in the humanitarian situation on the borders, what do you do in those towns if people start starving in those towns, if there is no medicine? He brought up Tripoli and mentioned the possibility of airdrops, as I would imagine how they would get the food aid in. So that's the first time we've heard the president bring that up. But as far as committing to anything, no, he did not do that.
He also spoke about this stalemate that you're seeing on the ground. I mean, that's the real problem now, isn't it? It doesn't seem that either side is able to outwit the other.
And that is one of the things that we've heard talked about in Washington, giving arms to the opposition. I mean, they've obviously chosen sides. It's not been like Egypt or Tunisia or any of the other protests where they've tried so carefully to stay in the middle. On this, they've made it pretty clear. The president just spelled it out for the first time on camera, saying that Colonel Gaddafi needs to leave, and he needs to leave right now. So they have chosen sides. The question is, what are they willing to do about it? You saw he didn't commit to the no-fly zone, but then again, he didn't dismiss it either, again, walking in the middle. But one of the much of the talk has been, okay, so if you side with the opposition, how far are you willing to go? Will you give them arms? Will you give them training? He didn't commit to that either, but he did say that all options are on the table. It's pretty clear what this administration is hoping happens. They are hoping to put enough pressure on the people around Gaddafi that he is eventually alienated, alone, and that ends the standoff. You heard him say we're monitoring the situation. That's been a consistent theme that they've been sending from this White House. The press spokesman saying that we're using all of our intelligence assets. So basically telling those supporters, we're watching you, and if you lose, we will come after you in the International Criminal Court. Now, whether or not that message is getting through, there's been some pushback here. They don't feel, at least the press corps has been pushing, saying, where's the momentum? If you keep pushing for this, what have you done or seen that gives you any indication that this strategy is working? And again, they just say, well, all options are on the table.
Yeah, but you wonder where the diplomacy is here. I mean, he stressed again the need to work within the international community, but you wonder whether everything in the diplomatic book has been played out.
Well, I think the military option, the no-fly zone, and actually the moving in of goods is obviously the next thing that they want to look for. I thought it was fairly striking because when they first even started talking about a no-fly zone, and it did seem that it was amping up in Washington, and then it suddenly just sort of fell off a cliff with yesterday's testimony. I thought it was interesting because every time they talked about it, they didn't actually say the UN. They said NATO. I think there was an understanding here that there were some countries within the UN that would simply never go for imposing a no-fly zone. But now we're hearing some countries within NATO saying we want to have that mandate from the United Nations. That sort of ties the hands of the U.S. because, as you've seen here in this administration, they are saying quite clearly, we don't want this to be a unilateral action. If we do it, it's going to have to be with international support. Now, whether or not that international support is there, well, that it very clearly remains to be seen.
I guess we're waiting on that no-fly zone then, aren't we? Patty Culhane, thanks for that update. Okay. So, in addition to comments about Libya, the purpose of that press conference has been to discuss U.S.-Mexico relations. It comes amid tension in the relationship over counter-narcotics efforts. A major thorn recently was the shooting of a U.S. immigration agent, Jaime Zapata, in northern Mexico by a suspected drug cartel leader. He died in that shooting. Now, the gun that was used had been smuggled in from the U.S. U.S. authorities say more than 60,000 American guns have been recovered in Mexico over the past 4 years. Drug violence has killed at least 34,000 Mexicans since Felipe Calderón took office in 2006. And according to the U.S. government, Mexican drug gangs earn between $13 and $48 billion a year from the United States. To fight the drug war, the Obama administration in 2008 pushed a plan known as the Merida Initiative. Now, this includes $1.4 billion worth of training and equipment for Mexican law enforcement. Here's what the two leaders had to say about the drug war just a few minutes ago.
Whether they live in Texas or Tijuana, our people have a right to be safe in their communities. So we are continuing to speed up the delivery of equipment and training that our Mexican partners need to keep up this fight. As President Calderón cracks down on money laundering in Mexico, we're putting unprecedented pressure on cartels and their finances here in the United States.
In terms of the border, both President Obama and I agree that we must turn this area into the land of opportunities and not of conflict.
Let's talk about this further with AlJazeera's Frank Contreras, who's in Mexico City. There's been a lot of acrimony in the relationship between the two gentlemen, both sides blaming the other that they're not doing enough in the war against drugs. Do you get a sense that they've overcome that and they have some sort of game plan going forward?
That's what the Mexican president is hoping today, Jane, that he'll be able to publicly express these concerns to the United States president, as well to the Speaker of the House in the United States Congress. He'll also be meeting with powerful business leaders in the United States and try to talk to them about security issues in Mexico. So he's going to try to show the Americans that this is a very important issue, that it ought to take a great deal of importance. But just imagine what the Mexican president felt there for a second, Jane, when the American president started taking reporters' questions, and the first question was about football. That was sort of emblematic of what Mexico feels when it comes